Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on quite a crucial exploration, turning our attention to Nepal. It's a country that's been making headlines, often for significant political upheaval, public protests. And right at the heart of much of this turmoil, we find this deeply entrenched issue: corruption. We've compiled, well, a really rich stack of sources for this deep dive, everything from academic studies, detailed news reports, to these on-the-ground anecdotes that frankly reveal just how pervasive this problem is. Our mission here is to cut through that complexity, give you those crucial aha moments, and really help you understand the multi-layered challenge of corruption, both in its public and private sectors, and, ultimately what it means for the everyday lives of its citizens.
Yeah, and what's truly eye-opening here is realizing that corruption isn't just like individual wrongdoing. It's often a symptom that's so deeply embedded in the system, in the culture. It fundamentally reshapes how society functions. Everything from justice to economic opportunity. It really forces us to ask, what if the system itself is almost designed in a way to make corruption nearly inevitable? So we'll explore not just what corruption looks like, but why it's become so entrenched, and crucially, what its far-reaching, oft-crippling consequences are for national development, for governance, and, yeah, most importantly, for the people of Nepal. So let's unpack this. Prepare for some maybe surprising insights.
Okay, let's start right there, on the ground. What does corruption often feel like for the average person? We're not talking necessarily about the grand, distant scandals right now. Sometimes it's the small, insidious acts, those daily frustrations that just chip away at trust, make life incredibly difficult. And these aren't just isolated incidents, are they? They seem woven into the fabric of daily interactions.
That's right. And this raises a really fundamental question, doesn't it? How do citizens even navigate a system where the formal rules often seem to hold less weight than, well, informal connections? Our sources reveal some pretty striking examples of how things truly get done.
Hmm.
One prominent concept is avnomanche. It literally translates to one's own people. And it describes this system of personal loyalty, could be kin, friends, caste, political party affiliation, that frequently, almost routinely, just overrides official rules and regulations.
Afnamanche, wow, that phrase alone really hints at a deep cultural undercurrent. What does that actually look like in practice?
Oh, it's powerful. We have this compelling anecdote from a chief district officer. He recounted his own neighbor, someone known to be Afnamanche, expecting to get a citizenship card without paying the fee, just because of their personal connection. And when he was denied, the neighbor's angry response was, "If I also should pay this fee, then why are you here?"
Hmm.
That really speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It really does. It's not just expecting a favor.
No, it's more than that. It's like an implicit belief that personal relationships should literally supersede legal obligations. So it's not just who you know, it's almost like a rewriting of the rules themselves, which is, well, a powerful, almost unsettling insight into how everyday life is navigated there.
That's profound. How personal relationships become this kind of currency, influencing access to basic rights. But it's not just about who you know, is it? Our sources also highlight how leveraging your social status, or maybe an official position, can dramatically change how quickly you get services.
Absolutely. Consider the story of an undersecretary. He spent a whole month trying to transfer land ownership, just acting as a general citizen. He kept getting hit with Biholi Onish, come tomorrow, or Aji Farshad, China, I don't have time today. The classic bureaucratic stalling.
The runaround.
Yeah. Exactly. Designed to wear ordinary citizens down. Yet the moment he finally introduced himself, mentioned his connections to the chief, the entire process was completed in just 30 minutes. And the employee who'd been unhelpful, immediately it was Namaskar, sir. It just shows how influence trumps procedure. And this often means that bribery, or as they sometimes call it, chia kan paisa,
Money for tea?
yeah, money for tea, it becomes an accepted, almost institutionalized part of daily transactions, even for basic things like paying taxes.
Money for tea is such an innocuous sounding phrase for something so damaging. The Kathmandu Post even shared an example, didn't they? A land surveyor demanding a bribe for a service that was supposed to be free, and his supervisor was apparently indirectly involved too. It just paints this picture where the expectation of a bribe is just woven into the system.
Right. And look, this isn't simply about greed, although that's certainly a factor. There's a deeply pragmatic side for citizens, too. Imagine you live in a remote area. You have to travel for days to a district headquarters, pay for lodging, food, only to be told come tomorrow over and over again. In that kind of scenario, paying speedy money to avoid those prolonged delays and mounting expenses, well, sadly, it can seem like the most rational choice.
Even though it perpetuates the very cycle of corruption.
Exactly. It highlights how systemic inefficiencies often create this kind of perverse demand for bribes. It's a tough spot.
It's a truly bleak picture at the ground level, isn't it? But what happens when these individual acts, these small bribes, scale up? When they poison the very institutions meant to serve the nation? Let's zoom out a bit to the institutional level. Our sources show that corruption in Nepal is widely seen as systemic, institutionalized. It involves everyone from political parties, senior government officials, right down to local representatives. It's clearly not just a few bad apples.
No, it seems much more like the whole orchard is compromised, as you say. And bringing this into a wider context, what we often see is corruption at the national institutional level, arising from things like overlapping authority, intense political power struggles over scarce resources, and also a dangerously weak separation between the civil service and partisan politics.
Right.
A major contributing factor here is just a severe lack of accountability and transparency.
Yeah.
You have complex, often non-transparent regulations that create tons of opportunities for discretionary decisions. And that discretion, that becomes fertile ground for corruption. The more leeway officials have, the more likely it becomes.
And Nepal has certainly seen its share of high-profile scandals, the kind that don't just make headlines internationally, but really deeply erode public trust.
Oh, indeed. Our sources list several, and each one is a testament to the scale of the problem. We've seen the gold smuggling scandal, huge quantities of gold brought in illicitly, bypassing taxes, regulations. Then there was that infamous Bhutanese Refugee Scam. A profound betrayal of trust, really. Government officials allegedly creating fake refugee documents for non-Bhutanese people, all for personal gain. It deeply harmed Nepal's international standing.
It's just awful.
Then the Lalita Niwas Landscandal, illegal transfer of government land to private individuals. And more recently, this massive cooperative fraud mega scandal, estimated at a staggering Rs 49 billion, affecting 2 million depositors and implicating politicians from multiple parties. What's particularly concerning, though, is how political interference often seems to shield these high-profile figures from swift, equitable justice.
So it's not just the scandals themselves, but the sense that those at the top can operate with impunity.
Precisely. You had the Deputy Prime Minister himself expressing frustration that political party members accused of corruption would threaten to pull support from the government, effectively undermining investigations. We also saw that instance where the Federal Affairs Minister resigned after an alleged bribery recording came out. But the land management minister, facing similar accusations, just flat out refused to resign.
Wow.
And analysts widely viewed that contrast as emblematic of selective accountability. Some are held to account, others are shielded by political power. There are even reports, of ministers illegally transferring employees to key posts like the Department of Road, major customs offices by taking money, placing loyalists, or maybe those who paid, in positions of influence.
It's clear the rules often seem to bend or even break for those in power, and it sounds like the very regulations meant to govern public service are also part of the problem itself.
Absolutely. Civil service regulations have been amended incredibly frequently, 24 times in just 39 years. And often, the sources say, not for public good, but for the vestigial interest of certain powerful people, which basically means these changes serve the leftover, often corrupt interests of specific influential individuals, like a secretary amending regulations just for his cousin's promotion.
Unbelievable.
It reveals this deep-seated internal bureaucratic dysfunction. And then there's Tipani. It's a kind of memo system that seems innocuous, but it contributes significantly to complexity, red tape. It's a process where superiors can basically legitimize arbitrary decisions, while subordinates skillfully avoid responsibility by just passing the memo along. There's a saying, Rochakakam Kayili Jealous Ham. While doing the king's work, the only concern is when will the sun set. It perfectly captures this culture of delay and, frankly, indifference.
That's fascinating, this Tiffany system enabling a sort of institutionalized buck passing. What other internal dysfunctions come out of this culture?
Well, secrecy is highly valued. Sometimes it's even legally enforced. But it often leads to what's called information hiding. Even for basic public reports that really should be transparent, this creates this opaque environment that's just ripe for manipulation. And finally, just the plain abuse of office. Civil servants exploiting official positions, resources for personal and family gain, using official vehicles for shopping, taking office supplies home, apparently disturbingly common. All these cultural values, they ultimately manifest in what experts call bureaupathology.
Bureaupathology.
Yes, the bureaucracy itself becomes sick. It means you get officials constantly passing the buck, drowning everything in red tape, obsessively guarding information, and this insatiable grasping for more power. often at the expense of genuine public service.
Okay, it's easy to point fingers at the government when we talk corruption, but our sources also highlight how deeply this issue is intertwined with the private sector, which ironically is meant to be this vital engine of growth for the country.
Right. And what's truly fascinating here is the paradox. The private sector theoretically advocates for competition, right? But in practice, it frequently supports monopolistic practices, cartels, syndicates. Nepal's economic liberalization after 1990, while it aimed for growth, inadvertently kind of neglected the poor. It allowed a small, powerful group to disproportionately benefit from privatized assets and these new economic opportunities. And this has severely distorted market dynamics. It stifles innovation, harms consumers significantly, especially in critical sectors like transportation, which is just plagued by powerful syndicates blocking new entrants and controlling prices.
So instead of fostering fair competition in a dynamic market, the private sector often seems to exploit these weak regulatory environments to create monopolies for themselves.
Precisely. The absence of robust, truly independent regulatory bodies means these agencies often just succumb to bribery, undue influence from powerful business interests. And this creates an environment where corporate fraud becomes rampant. We see common forms like loan misappropriation funds diverted from their intended purpose, outright fund embezzlement, widespread banking frauds that compromise financial stability, insider trading, where privileged information is used for personal gain, manipulation of financial statements to evade taxes, blatant collusion in construction bids leading to inflated costs, substandard work. It creates what one source called an inhospitable environment for ethical enterprises.
Inhospitable.
Yeah, it basically forces them to either align with these exploitative practices or face severe competitive disadvantages, often leading them to just exit the market altogether.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. Beyond the systems, beyond the regulations, our sources suggest corruption in Nepal is a deeply rooted social issue, profoundly intertwined with the country's sociocultural values. It's not just about what people do, but maybe why they do it, often without even questioning it.
Right. And bringing this to a wider context, many aspects of Nepal's administrative culture are a direct, almost mirror-like reflection of its societal culture, which raises a really important question for all of us, actually. How do values instilled from childhood or inherited through generations come to shape the behavior of civil servants, politicians? Take the hierarchical caste system, for instance. Its vertical dependency. These status-oriented attitudes where higher castes traditionally gain higher status, lower castes are excluded, they're clearly reflected in the administrative system.
Can you give us a vivid example of that, how the caste system plays out in the administrative world?
Absolutely. We found this really compelling example of delayed peon in a government office being asked to call another peon to bring tea, simply due to his caste.
Wow, even inside a government office.
Exactly. It's a stark reminder of how deeply embedded this hierarchy is, permeating even supposedly modern institutions. And tragically, outside formal structures, our sources mention the Mandals, a group often associated with higher social standing, who have been known to physically thrash Dalit families over trivial issues. It vividly demonstrates this entrenched discrimination and power imbalance. The data on civil service recruitment really backs this up too. High caste Brahmins, Chetri, Nur, dominated. They make up 55–68% of selected candidates. Meanwhile, Dalits and other ethnic groups have negligible representation, especially in higher positions. And traditional gender roles also play a part. Women's arguments sometimes get dismissed as potibesko.
Crow the hen.
Yeah, crow the hen, seen as an unnatural sign. It diminishes their voice.
That really drives home how these social structures influence everything, even who gets to serve, how their contributions are valued, what other deep cultural factors are at play here.
Well, another profound one is fatalism. This widespread belief in predetermined fate, often expressed through concepts like karma and bhavi. This belief can, unfortunately, reduce individual initiative and responsibility. It can hinder innovation, proactive problem solving, because people might believe their achievements, or lack thereof, are already written. Then there's the family structure and childhood socialization. Extended families, patriarchal dominance, this emphasis on unquestioning obedience over critical argument. You hear phrases like, do not argue with seniors, commonly. These patterns are deeply replicated in administrative hierarchies. There's a proverb, Suarga ko karindo banda narka ko hakim naithik.
Which means?
It is better to be a boss in hell than a subordinate in heaven. It perfectly illustrates the ingrained cultural value placed on authority and hierarchy above almost all else.
It's a truly fascinating link how these societal norms, these childhood lessons, trickle all the way up to shape administrative behavior. And it seems that wealth plays a pertinent role too, regardless of where it came from.
Indeed. Society often seems to worship wealth, almost regardless of its source. It can actively encourage illegal earnings. People with big houses, kids in expensive English schools, conspicuous ornaments, they're often considered clever and successful civil servants, irrespective of their actual performance or how they got that wealth. It creates this perverse incentive structure where the appearance of success, however attained, is prioritized. And we can't overlook Chakari again here, originally a historical practice of appeasing superiors to gain favor.
Right, we mentioned that briefly.
But it's now this deeply ingrained social mechanism where performance, qualifications, are often less important than loyalty and personal dedication to the boss.
Yeah.
Some civil servants apparently go to the extent of pleasing a boss's wife with gifts. It just shows the extreme lengths this appeasement can go to. And all these cultural values, ultimately, they manifest in that bureaupathology we discussed earlier, the buck passing, the red tape, the secrecy, the thrust for power.
So, with all these complex, deep-seated factors at play, what does this all mean for Nepal? The widespread corruption, fueled by these interlocking elements, must have just devastating consequences beyond individual acts. It paints a truly grim picture for the country's future.
Yeah, it does. And this raises that critical question. How does systemic corruption undermine a nation's aspirations for progress, for good governance? Our sources paint a stark, frankly troubling picture. It critically hinders overall national development across almost every sector. You see persistent job scarcity leading to this desperate search for opportunities elsewhere. Infrastructure projects, vital for growth, are plagued by delays, substandard work. Think about roads washing away just months after construction, or bridges never completed, leaving communities isolated.
Just wasted resources.
Totally. Public services, health, education become dysfunctional, denying citizens basic rights. And tragically, there's this significant brain drain we talked about. 75,000 to 80,000 people leaving monthly for jobs abroad, 100,000 students studying overseas, most unlikely to return. This is a hemorrhaging of Nepal's most skilled, most educated youth. It's starving the country of its future potential.
That's a truly crippling impact affecting every aspect of society. It's not just economic, is it? It seems to be tearing at the very fabric of democracy and social justice, too.
Yeah. Corruption fundamentally erodes public trust, which then inevitably weakens democratic institutions. When citizens see that those in power are corrupt, that the system is rigged, it fosters deep anti-establishment sentiments. People become disillusioned with the entire political system, and its impact is disproportionately severe on marginalized groups. Dalits, indigenous people, they often can't access basic government services like citizenship cards. Not just because of bureaucratic hurdles, but critically because they lack that apna-manche, those connections, or they simply can't afford the bribes. This systemic injustice, it has a breaking point, and our sources highlight its direct connection to the recent turmoil. The public outcry over corruption fueled those Gen Z protests in September 2025. That led to deadly violence, the Prime Minister's resignation, attacks on government buildings to Parliament, the Supreme Court, and then the subsequent appointment of an interim government. The people's frustration just reached a boiling point.
It's clear this is an incredibly complex, multifaceted problem, almost overwhelming in its scope. But our sources also offer potential solutions, right? Strategies aimed at addressing this deeply ingrained challenge. What kinds of approaches are being proposed to chart a course forward? It can't just be one single thing, surely.
You're absolutely right. It has to be a comprehensive, multi-sectoral approach. If we connect this to the bigger picture, effective anti-corruption efforts demand much more than just new laws. They need fundamental shifts. In the public sector, strict law enforcement is paramount. A significant 35% of survey respondents believe that's the primary action needed. But implementing that is incredibly difficult when powerful individuals are often protected. Political will is also absolutely crucial. 26% emphasize the need for leaders themselves to be honest, transparent. Deputy Prime Minister Narayan Kaji Shrestha himself publicly stated it's impossible to have a clean government without real unity and united efforts by all parties to address corruption. That's a clear recognition of the challenge from within.
So a combination of political leadership and accountability within the public sector. But how do you enforce that when the system itself feels compromised?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Beyond political will, you need honest, transparent, and truly accountable public sectors. That was an opinion held by 24% of respondents. Simplifying administrative procedures is key. Complex regulations create those notorious opportunities for corruption. Imagine reducing the number of steps, the number of officials involved in, say, a land transfer. Fewer bottlenecks mean fewer points where bribes can be demanded. Technological innovation is also promising. Online systems for administrative services, company registration, tax filing, reporting, plus digital record keeping. These could dramatically reduce that human-to-human contact and thus the opportunities for bribery.
Makes sense.
However, our sources do acknowledge these are currently underutilized. Often, they just replace typewriters with computers, while the underlying archaic processes remain unchanged. There's also the roadmap for affirmative action, aiming to increase representation of women 20% of post-Dalits, 10%, and indigenous people another 10%. The idea is to address those historical imbalances and foster a more inclusive and potentially less corrupt administrative culture.
Now, what about the private sector? They're clearly a big part of the problem, as we discussed, but also potentially part of the solution. What specific reforms are being looked at there?
Yeah, for the private sector, the importance of prioritizing accountability, transparency, ethical practices, it just cannot be overstated. This includes implementing strong internal controls. That means robust auditing, oversight within companies themselves. It also means actively dismantling those cartels and syndicates we talked about. Think about breaking up the transportation monopolies and empowering consumers and civil society to demand accountability from businesses. They need to feel the pressure. But the reform efforts must also extend into that socio-cultural sphere, tackling those deeply ingrained values.
That makes profound sense, given how deep those cultural roots go. So what kind of sociocultural changes are being proposed, and how realistic are they for achieving, fundamental, lasting change?
It's arguably the most challenging area of reform, and the longest term. Education is seen as vital, advocating for moral education right from school through to university, integrating anti-corruption, corporate governance topics into curricula, trying to instill a different set of values from a young age. Community engagement is another angle, promoting the social exclusion of corrupt individuals and cultures, fostering a zero-tolerance policy. This isn't just about legal punishment, but social stigma making corruption unacceptable within communities. And importantly, challenging those fatalistic beliefs that hinder individual responsibility and innovation. That's a monumental but necessary shift, encouraging a belief that collective action can indeed change one's fate, rather than just accepting things as predetermined.
That's a huge undertaking, potentially generations of work.
Absolutely. And the big challenge, however, is that despite numerous reform efforts, despite well-intentioned proposals, substantial outcomes are still largely elusive. These efforts are often thwarted by deeply entrenched vested interests, those who benefit from the status quo, and a powerful resistance to change. Bureaucracy itself, as we discussed, often fears losing status and power, making it an active impediment to reforms that threaten its established ways. It's this constant tug-of-war between the desire for progress and the forces of ingrained tradition and, well, self-preservation.
So what we've really seen today is that corruption in Nepal isn't just about a few bad actors. It's a complex, almost dizzying interplay of institutional weaknesses, powerful economic drivers, and these deeply ingrained sociocultural values like Afno Manchan and Chakari. And it affects everything, from getting a basic government service or operating a business, right through to the nation's overall development and its very democratic stability.
Yeah, and this leads to an important thought maybe for you to consider. If administrative culture so profoundly reflects societal culture, what does it truly take to change a society's norms and beliefs, to make genuine, lasting reform possible? Is it stronger laws and enforcement? Is it technological solutions that bypass human interaction? Or is it a fundamental, maybe generational shift in how people view power, relationships, and individual responsibility within their communities, within their nation? This deep dive has shown that in Nepal, these profound questions are being wrestled with every single day. And the answer, it likely lies in addressing all these intricate layers simultaneously in a sustained and, frankly, courageous effort.